a few performances with you. And thanks to the Colburn School, because I would have been broadcasting this from my home apartment, which is a mere 10-minute walk down the hill on Pershing Square in the historic core of downtown Los Angeles. Lamentably, my upload speed with AT&T was sort of Stone Age level, so I managed to, with permission of the senior administration, get into my studio, which is where you're seeing me now, the Colburn Cello Studio, which is overlooking Grand Avenue. We have Disney Hall across the street. Of course, things are very quiet, and I'm probably one of a handful of people on campus right now, but I'm able to take advantage of the magnificent high-speed internet connection we have here at Colburn. So anyway, welcome to the cello studio. So today, I would also like to credit several other people. A good friend of mine, the bass player, virtuoso bass player Jeremy McCoy, introduced me several weeks ago virtually to Max Michael Jacob, who has helped me prepare the video performance that you're about to see of Bach and Cassado. And he is an absolute genius at putting things together. So thank you, Max, for your collaboration and artistry, because it's very it requires a very specific skill set and a great deal of an aesthetic sense to be able to do this well. So thank you very much. And so to the program, it's just two works, two wonderful works that have been personal favorites of mine for many years. We'll start with the Cassado. This is a piece which I think probably for a while it wasn't played. I don't quite know why, but it was thanks to great legendary cellists such as János Starker that the piece became more popular again. Of course, Cassado himself was that wonderful brand of cellist-composer. And so he was born in 1876, and sorry, I got that wrong there. The date was 1897. He was a student of Pablo Casals. He was a wonderful player, and of course there's a wonderful legacy, a rich legacy of recordings by him. His father was a composer and organist and a choral conductor. He is from Barcelona originally. Studied with Casals, as I said, and then went on to collaborate with many of the leading conductors and orchestras of the day. I have a lovely personal connection in that in later life he taught at the Accademia Chigiana in Siena, and I'm very fortunate to be also teaching there in the summer months, which is a great honor. And last summer when I flew to Italy, there was a problem with my flight connection, and I had to leave my cello with my daughter in Hanoco in Brooklyn, and I was loaned the Stradivari cello, which is owned by the Chigiana family, which is a Stradivarius cello, and it was played on by Cassado himself for several years, and I had that in my hands for 2 weeks last summer, so that was a very special and meaningful experience. Interestingly enough, a colleague of mine many years ago told me, and I managed to verify this, that poor Cassado fell foul of Casals, and that he continued to perform in Germany during the Second World War, and Casals thought this was outrageous. And I heard that he even encouraged people not to attend his debut recital in New York. It was hard for Cassado and for all the artists at that period, during that period. Anyway, he was a prolific composer. I remember playing the Goyaskas intermezzo arrangement by Cassado, and he even arranged Schubert's Arpeggione Sonata for cello and orchestra, and there's a recording that you can find of that. The piece itself is very much inspired by the Kodály Sonata Opus 8. There's a sort of underlying saraband rhythm, which ties in nicely with the fourth suite, with the emphasis on the second beat, and of course the saraband was originally a Spanish dance. Then there's a wonderful sardana, which is a Catalan folks rhythm song, which begins the second movement, and then a wonderful rousing rhythmic section, and then the little intermezzo, and then this wonderful catchy dance finale. In the middle you'll hear references to Ravel's Daphnis and Chloe, that wonderful flute solo, and the piece exploits lots of different aspects of cello technique, including harmonics and double stops. And it's a wonderful piece to play, and I've always wanted to learn it, and I've finally had time thanks to the shutdown, so that's what I've been doing over the last month or so. So now the Bach, again, it's a piece that I'd never played in public, I'm ashamed to say, but I've been looking at it very carefully. And with my studio here at Colburn, we started off in the middle of March looking at the Fourth Suite Prelude, and we did lots of different, looking at different performances, not only just for the cello, but including viola and also the lute. It's a very interesting piece. It's a piece that is quite taxing. The first movement, the prelude, is not in a cello-friendly key. There are very few chances to use the resonance of the open strings, but it's an extraordinary study in chord progressions and in the bass line. It's a funny thing, we talk about solo Bach, but actually with Bach we're often accompanying ourselves because you have so many different voices, and it is extraordinary, sometimes through implication, but through the chord writing and through the bass line progression. It's sort of like the map, and that guides the listener from, for example, bar 1 to 49, when you go from B flat major and you finish on the low C sharp. Wonderful improvisatory passages that follow. And then in the wonderful set of dance movements that follow, there's every possible kind of atmosphere and a feeling of rhythmic variety. I love the allemande. It's so gracious and elegant, a wonderful earthy courante, and then the most incredibly beautiful sarabande, and then two really hilarious and comic and playful bourrées, and then a whirlwind, again, rather, I would say, down to earth and incredibly comic gigue, where we often think of Bach, the great polyphonist and academic, where he was, of course, able to write music of incredible down-to-earth quality and of good cheer and witty good humor. Okay, so after the broadcast, after the playing, I'll be here and I'll be very happy to answer some questions. And thank you all very much for listening in. It's been a great pleasure to work on these two pieces. And I hope everybody's doing well wherever you are, scattered across the globe. And I'm going to now start the recital. I hope you enjoy it, and thanks for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. I've been pacing around the studio trying to make sure the link worked. I apologize, the link was not quite correct apparently for the YouTube live, but apparently it worked okay on Facebook. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. Max, good to see you here. Thanks for tuning in. And Hannah and everybody else, Darren, it was lovely to hear from you all. So if anybody has any questions or just wants to say hi, please go ahead. So, yes, CHW. Oh, thank you. Thank you for watching the CMS broadcasts. Yeah, well, I was supposed to be there in October, but it was it was just cancelled or postponed, I should say. So it might happen in the spring. Actually, it was going to be Cassado Piano Trio. Anyway, what else? Some texts are coming in. I wonder what the music director has to say. Jeff, I hope you're doing all right. I've got some friends in upstate New York. Christine and Joe White are listening in. Oh, Olivia, one of my students was listening in and loved Nino's cameo role. Yeah, we kept that in to give it a nice home-like feel. Nino doesn't really like it when I practice when it gets intense because he knows I get upset when I'm not playing well. So he tends to wander off, and I don't think there was something about my playing he didn't like. Anyway, cute to see him there. Thank you for your comments, everybody. If anybody has a question, please go ahead. Oh, okay, Hannah. Hi, Hannah. Hannah Collins. How are you, Hannah? Thank you for noticing the stretch. I think I did some permanent damage to my hand actually trying to get that seventh. No, it was okay, but I really had to. I noticed that my hand the stretch got bigger as I was working on the jig. The question is, firstly, Hannah, and then there's a question from Christine. Any lessons learned as a performer at various festivals that are on your mind as you take the helm for the Nevada Chamber Music Festival? So as a performer, I think the most important thing is that you're in groups with a good chemistry, a good balance with your colleagues, and that the repertoire is well planned. And that takes an immense amount of planning. It's been lots of hours spent for the Nevada Chamber Music Festival thinking about repertoire and the suitability of repertoire for the public and for the players, the cast of players, how those programs balance out. Obviously, they've got to have a good, if you like, a narrative, and themes are, I always get very interested in thematic programming. And so I think what I've learned so far is that you have to be very realistic when there's not so much rehearsal time, what is going to be possible. There are certain works that I played in the quartet, such as the Brahms string quintets, that I would never dream of programming unless I knew there was going to be adequate rehearsal time. There are other pieces that you can put together on relatively little rehearsal. Then there's audience fatigue. You have to make sure that you're not outstaying your welcome. If there's a piece that's very challenging, it has to be counterbalanced with more manageable pieces. It's also very important to be progressive and to constantly think, what else could we be doing that would be more interesting and more provocative and more thought provoking. And in fact, we're going to do that next festival with a focus on African American composers, which have been so appallingly underrepresented historically. But I often like to put in works that are less familiar and off the beaten track, and that's one of the great pleasures of being able to program. And I found that I really enjoy it. It's one of the most rewarding parts of being an artistic director. Oh, Christine, yes, I used the cello was made in 2018 by Filippo Fasser, who is a wonderful maker. I think he's approximately my age. He studied in Middenwald, and the cello was I picked it up for a Montrose Trio tour of Italy 2 years ago, and then brought it back to the States, and I've been playing on it quite often, especially the last 3 months where we've been in quarantine. And to my great delight, I found that it's a really nice cello for solo Bach. It has a really good middle register and a wonderfully rich, warm C string. And it's beautiful to look at. And the model itself is of Rogeri, one of the famous 18th century, late 17th century, early 18th century makers from Brescia. Well, personally, I've always been a big fan of modern makers and of modern bow makers too. There's an economic reason for that because the older instruments are so incredibly expensive. But not just that. I really believe that the modern makers are able to create instruments that will stand the test of time and that are easy to use and are, frankly speaking, no less impressive sonically than their older counterparts. So it's been, of course, you need to take time to break in a cello or a new instrument of any kind, but that means your bond with the instrument is that much stronger. You really invest in it to try to bring out the best in it and to encourage it to open up and to work with it. And that's what I love about commissioning an instrument or a bow. It's very it's a journey, but it takes time and commitment, and you have to understand that it won't sound probably for the first few years. It's not going to reach its full potential by any means, but you have to really commit to it. I've actually been encouraged because I feel in the last 3 months it's really opened out the more that I've played on it. Hannah Collins from my niece Lily McGowan, age 9, who just played a Zoom recital on violin today. How do you not get nervous before a recital? Well, you can't avoid getting nervous if you care about what you do. If you're sensitive and you know what's at stake and you've practiced very well, there's always an element of fear and anxiety. And the question is how to channel that. And the only thing you can really do is do it and keep doing it until you begin to feel more comfortable on stage when there are people in the hall or there are brighter lights, or if you're wearing a jacket and it's not comfortable, or just simply speaking, you walk out and you were fine before you went on stage, and then you get out on stage and suddenly your palms are sweating. All of those things you learn as you get older. Lily, you learn how to cope with that. You'll never banish the nerves completely, but there is a way, I think, to be able to live with them and to perhaps channel them for good reasons and for good results. But it takes time. The other element is, when I was younger, I used to think, oh, if I got nervous, I would make a mistake. That was just tough. It was the way it would be. But if you practice really fastidiously and you practice carefully, that is a safeguard against things falling below a level that you wouldn't be happy with. Somebody once asked me if I have any routines before going on stage. Are you superstitious? They asked me, a lucky shirt or a routine or whatever. And I'm superstitious about not practicing enough. If I've done enough work, and frankly, I never feel I have, but if I've put the right kind of hours in and thought about what I'm doing, it'll be easier. And the other thing now is, maybe, Lily, you can record yourself, which is so easy now with phones, and put the phone on a music stand and pretend you're playing that the phone is the public and record yourself. The minute you press record, you're going to feel more uptight because somebody is watching you. And magnify that, and that's what it's like being on stage. And it's never going to be as comfortable as playing alone. So I would suggest you use the technology available and make videos of yourself. And or even without the phone, you walk into a room, put your instrument down, walk out, come back in, and then pretend that it's a live concert. And just be honest with yourself that you're not going to feel as secure sometimes as you do when you're alone at home or in the practice room. So accept that, and then just, for example, if you get nervous, your heart starts beating faster, your tempi might get faster, or your vibrato might get faster, or you're shifting the balance, or the timing of the shift will change. So remember that. So let's say shifting is your weak point, or vibrato gets tight and fast. Practice with that in mind when you're alone at home. It's all about knowing yourself and knowing how you react under pressure. Some people, they go into kind of a sort of an ecstatic state, and they go into a sort of meditative state rather, and things are slower and more. I don't know. Their way of coping is to sort of retreat a bit. Others, like me, get much more fired up, and there's too much adrenaline, and I tend to rush, and my timing goes off. So, with that in mind, that's how I try to prepare, knowing that things will not be as smooth, perhaps, as they should have been. And of course, memorization. That's another thing. You have to practice that, and I do a lot of work without the score. It's amazing when you work hard, when you practice, and you put your instrument down, and you wake up the next morning you've been practicing in the early hours. You know, your fingers are twitching. You're going through the patterns in your mind. You can see the music in your mind's eye, and you're still in reality. You're actually still practicing because your body remembers. The muscle memory is there, and you remember those figurations. And in fact, sometimes I wake up, or I'm just about to fall asleep, and I figure out a new fingering in my head, and I come back to the cello and think, why didn't I discover that earlier? So we do a lot of work away from the instrument. I think that's worth remembering. Nathan, how are you, Nathan, from Chicago? This is my lovely student, Nathan Moe, and Olivia earlier. What do you use for your recording setup? Well, just an iPhone. I had at home, Chizuko brought me a stand, and we put the iPhone on and just recorded it. All of the wonderful sound that you hear, well, I would say a large part is that Max did such a wonderful job with the judicious amount of reverb, and he's such an artist that way, and he made me sound a lot better than I probably should have done. But I'd have to ask Max what he uses. I know he has a program that he uses on his iMac, which is with a fast processor. I do have mics at home, but we tried one and we weren't able to figure out how to use it because we're over 50. So ultimately, I have a huge debt of gratitude towards Max because he took care of all of that, and of course I'll pass on his information to you, Nathan, if you'd wish. Francis, hi, how are you? Jeff's mother. Has there been any upside for you or your practice from being confined during the lockdown? Well, the upside has been I've had time to practice. Things were very busy, but of course I was at home, and I would typically, from the middle of March, teach probably 4 or 5 Zoom lessons a day, and that would take place usually in the afternoon. And then I had a little bit more free time because I wasn't wasting time getting from A to B. It was very interesting to see that my schedule had dried up to the point that all I was doing was teaching and practicing and cooking and cleaning and answering emails and not having to rush off to LAX and fly somewhere. I mean, we had so many concerts that were cancelled. My trio and myself, we lost a tour of Italy. I lost lots of concert engagements, and all the 9 summer festivals, I think it was, almost all of them have gone, or some, like this, are online now. So I had time to practice, and that was really very, very comforting. And the other thing is I was able to really connect in a funny way. Despite the distance, I was able to connect more intimately with my students, and we've been exploring, in fact, we started exploring the Prelude of the Fourth Suite, and there's such a wealth of material to look at online. I'm talking about the 5 sources that we look at, historical sources for the Bach suites that begin with Anna Magdalena, his wife, and then Kellner, and then 3 others that came later, talking about the difference between the different sources, and then listening to, we went through 17 different performances of the Prelude of the Fourth Suite you just heard, and then talking about the philosophical difference in approaches, because they're so wide-ranging at this point. In 2020, we've been through the early music revolution, and we can listen all the way back to Casals, who recorded these pieces after studying them alone in isolation for the first 50-something years, and then he recorded them, and that began the legacy of recordings of the complete Bach suites in the early 30s. People, of course, Peter Wisboy has just recorded them for the 3rd time. So there are all these questions that we face now. Do we play on a Baroque cello? Do we use gut strings? Do we use a period bow? Do we use a combination of those things? Which editions do we trust? Or do we trust different editions for different aspects? And to look at all of that in quarantine has been fascinating because we've actually had time to really think about it and share our thoughts and feelings about it. And the wonderful thing is so many ways work, and they're all valid. Some, for me, are more attractive than others, but they can be, if you have strong reasons to do what you do, they can, as long as it's convincing and makes sense, there's room for a multitude of different approaches. and you discover a lot about yourself playing Bach, and that's what I think we've all been discovering over the last 3 months. I know it's a bit of a cliche because that's what everybody was talking about as soon as the quarantining came into effect. Everybody was, talking about solo Bach because you didn't need a pianist or an orchestra, and people can play in their living rooms. And but I saw the opportunity, and I thought, wow, this is going to be a period of time we may not get again. Let's use it wisely and try to learn new pieces, which was the case for me in both instances. Both pieces for me were new. I'd been teaching them and playing them alone, but I'd never actually gotten them up to a performance level to share with you today. So that was a wonderful window of opportunity. And the other is just to lead a sort of normal life, because as a musician you lead this nomadic life, and it's been actually quite nice to be at home. And the other upside is that I've been watching very dramatic events unfold literally 200 feet under my apartment windows here in downtown. We started with the spectacle of a pandemic where I was able to ride all over downtown LA on my bike with almost no other traffic on the road. Freeways were empty, and I was going all around downtown, which felt like a sort of a sanctuary. The sky was clear, the air was fresh. It felt very unlike the typical grime of LA. And then after that, we had those extraordinary protests, which were peaceful and marvelous and absolutely magnificent display of coming together and the noble cause that Black Lives Matter, and all of the good things that were coming out of that. There were, I have to say, in downtown, for the first 48 hours, some really quite off-putting incidents of vandalism. And indeed, one of the reasons why I decided to record was that there'd been a lot of noise outside my apartment, because I live on Pershing Square, which is the center of the historic core of downtown. And that's historically where a lot of marches have taken place. In fact, the building to my right, which looks across Pershing Square, is the site of the original home of the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra. It's now a condo, but for years it was, from 1906, I believe, it was a wonderful hall, which was sadly razed to the ground in 1985 and then became a parking lot. And that's right next door to my building. And then across the square we have the wonderful statue of Beethoven, and it was left by William Clark, who was an early patron and founder of the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and of course General Pershing. And then so that square has been historically a site of a lot of demonstrations and protests. And of course for 3 nights it was quite noisy, and there were fires and riot police and vandalism. And I'm sure everybody saw those sites, but it of course quietened down, and I was able to join one of the protests just around the square and took lots of photos. And so it was fascinating to watch that unfold, and to be here in downtown LA during that period. Other things that have been good about this have just been the chance to spend time alone, and to be not worried so much about the frantic nature of life, which it seems to be getting busier by the year. It's been lovely just to stay in one place and to be with my family and to spend time with them. I include Nino, our dog, who you saw in the video, and to spend time connecting with old friends and colleagues, which has been a great pleasure. Christine White, are you planning on rescheduling your Italian tour with the trio? Yes, we are. Our manager told us that they're definitely planning on that, and that will happen. We don't know, not next season, but probably the season after that. It was such a shame. We were going to have 5 concerts, but lamentably the first one would have started in Lombardy, which was the epicenter of the COVID-19 outbreak at that point in the middle of March. So sadly, that didn't happen. But we will reschedule, as we hope that many of the concerts will come back, just not next season, but after that, in the fullness of time. Well, perhaps we can wrap up now. Thank you, everybody, for listening and supporting. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody else's online videos and performances. And once again, thank you for watching. This is my studio at the Colburn School, where my students and I have spent so many hours over the last few years. And thank you again to Jeff Hurd, Artistic Director of the Geneva Music Festival. Sorry we can't all be together in upstate New York in beautiful Geneva this summer. Thank you to Jeff and your Jeff's parents and all the friends and patrons, board members of the Geneva Festival. It's such a special communal spirit being in Geneva for the summer, and I really miss it. And of course to the Geneva on the Lake, they were always so incredibly generous, housing me in that beautiful historic hotel on the bank side of Seneca Lake. And all my very best wishes to everybody, and hope everybody stays well and safe, and hope to see you all again in person before too long. Bye-bye.